To engage a person, one must know the purpose of the engagement. The case manager must be clear on the role with the other person. The case manager is being paid by an organization to assess and address the needs of the person. The case manager must be clear on their boundaries in this engagement. This is not a friendship. The case manager is neither a peer nor a friend, but rather a tool for the person to use in reconnecting to things that matter to him or her. So if we look at the model of a person-centered model, we see that the services occur in a natural setting for the patient or the client. And the focus is on the whole person and their wellness. Natural supports are used, and families or significant others, their input is obtained. The client controls what happens based on their preferences. Family preferences are considered, and realizing the case manager is a facilitator. Case management services take into account the long-term view of the client's life. The assessment is made of the client's functioning in the life areas related to the client's life goals, and then the intervention is based on the client as the center of the service network, with a concern for the client's independence, their productivity, and integration. Assistance is arranged in terms of supports the client's needs for living and working and playing. Functional skills the client needs are learned in real-life situations. The client participates and is provided opportunities, makes choices, and creates his or her own affiliations. Most people with severe psychiatric disabilities do not readily or willingly seek out the assistance of a case manager. The journey of mental illness is not a trip that anyone wants to take, and thus is one for which people are unlikely to contact a case manager for assistance, at least in the early phases of the illness. Due to the stigma that continues to accrue to mental illness in popular culture, the lack of education or information provided to the lay public regarding psychiatric disorders, and the denial and disbelief that accompanies the onset of many serious illnesses, people often struggle with serious mental illness for many years before coming to understand what they are struggling with is a psychiatric disorder. It may then be another prolonged period before they can muster the courage and trust to accept their need for treatment and support. As a result, case managers cannot assume that clients will come to them of their own volition out of a genuine desire to receive guidance. Should a person willingly seek out the assistance of a case manager, then the provider's job is made considerably easier. The first job of the case manager is to engage a reluctant and disbelieving, but nonetheless suffering person in care. Most people will not know that they have a psychiatric disorder at first, and therefore will not seek help on their own. The initial focus of care, thus, should be on the person's own understanding of his or her predicament, not necessarily the events or difficulties which brought him or her to your attention, and the ways in which the provider can be helpful in addressing this predicament, regardless of how the person understands it at the time. The case manager needs to take the client's own perception of his or her difficulties as the point of departure for any efforts to be effective in developing a trusting relationship. In the common parlance of community-based practitioners, this is captured by the phrase, meeting the client where he or she is at. In order to meet the client where he or she is at, this lesson was learned initially in conducting outreach to persons who were homeless, when outreach staff began to realize that people were more responsive to offers of coffee and a sandwich or concrete assistance with secure housing or meeting other basic needs than to offers of psychiatric treatment or medication. It was extrapolated that providers need to attend to what the prospective client is concerned about most, regardless of the relationship to his or her mental illness. In this respect, providers cannot assume that everyone with a mental illness experiences the illness in the same way, or has a similar experience of seeking or receiving help in the past. In fact, people have many different ways of accounting for the disruptions, the interruptions, and the difficulties brought about by the illness, ranging from the perception that he or she is being conspired against by others, to his or her own unique relationship to God, to the effects of previous accidents or substance abuse, to punishments for earlier sins. Rather than viewing these perceptions or beliefs as further evidence of the client's illness, it is suggested that it's more useful to view them as representing the client's best efforts to make sense of his or her own experience. The client's attitude towards you and the kind of assistance you have to offer will be shaped by his or her previous experiences with psychiatric treatment and the mental health system as a whole, particularly if he or she has had experiences of involuntary commitment or forced medication. Despite your most benevolent intentions, suspiciousness towards mental health services and a legitimately earned skepticism regarding providers' motives may make the engagement process complicated or protracted. In prior research involving interviews with clients, we learned that clients may resist engagement efforts from staff if they perceive that they are being asked to do things by strangers that have not yet taken the time to get to know them as a person. This research suggested that while there is value in offering problem-specific psychoeducation and other clinical interventions, there is equal, if not more, value in getting to know the individuals first, independent of his or her own illness. The person may be an accomplished pianist, a lover of pepperoni pizza, or a nervous mom worried about losing custody of her children. Engaging the person around one of his or her own interests or concerns may prove to be key in establishing yourself in the client's eyes as an individual who is genuinely interested in and concerned about his or her well-being. In addition to meeting the client where he or she is and expressing genuine interest in him or her as a person, efforts with clients who have come to mistrust the mental health system and others in general need to be repetitive and persistent over time. Efforts to be persistent in engaging the client should not, however, supersede the overarching goal of establishing and maintaining a trusting relationship with the client. The case manager must be careful then to allow the individual the right to decline his overtures and advice and other interventions, and to enter into the relationship at a pace that is comfortable for the client. From the client's perspective, this is described as people sticking by me or believing in me when I no longer believed in myself. In one instance, there was a case that only after several months of repeated efforts to engage the client that she first began to have some trust in the staff's concern and intentions towards her, and it wasn't until she began to feel understood by the staff after several more months that she began to listen to what they were saying and consider their recommendations, thereby loosening her hold on the isolation and daily substance abuse to which she had become accustomed. Eventually, she was able to reveal that she had been a practicing architect before the onset of her affective disorder, and she showed the staff some of her sketches, and she began to take a more active role in her own recovery. The kind of patience and persistence required by this type of work is obviously not for everyone. As described by Estroff, this type of approach appeals to people who do not know the meaning of the word no. They don't like the status quo and they will try anything to help their clients, and they are not loyal to institutions or centers, only to the people they are working with. In more positive terms, the process of gentle but persistent pursuit was captured eloquently by Saint-Exupéry in his children's tale, The Little Prince. In this tale, a young prince travels the galaxy, learning important lessons from the various people, animals, and plants that he meets along the way. When he reaches the earth, he learns what it means to tame a fox in the following passage. "Good morning," said the fox. "Good morning, little prince," responded politely. "Who are you?" he asked, and then added, "You are very pretty to look at." "I am a fox," the fox said. "Come and play with me," proposed the little prince. "I am so unhappy." "I cannot play with you," the fox said. "I am not tamed." Please excuse me," said the little prince, but after some thought he added, "What does that mean, to tame?" "It is an act too often neglected," said the fox. "It means to establish ties." "To establish ties?" "Just that," said the fox. "To me you are still nothing more than a little boy who is just like 100,000 other little boys, and I have no need of you, and you on your part have no need of me. To you I am nothing more than a fox, like 100,000 other foxes. But if you tame me, then we shall need each other. To me you will be unique in all the world, and to you I shall be unique in all the world. My life is very monotonous," he said. "I hunt chickens, men hunt me, and all the chickens are just alike, and all the men are just alike. And, in consequence, I'm a little bored. But if you tame me, it will be as if the sun came to shine in my life. I shall know the sound of a step that will be different from all the others. Other steps send me hurrying back underneath the ground. Yours will call me, like music, out of my burrow. And then look, you see the grain fields down yonder? I do not eat bread. Wheat is of no use to me. The wheat fields have nothing to say to me, and that is sad. But you have hair that is the color of gold. Think how wonderful that will be when you have tamed me. The grain, which is also golden, will bring me back to the thought of you, and I shall love to listen to the wind in the wheat." "What must I do to tame you?" said the little prince. "You must be very patient," replied the fox. "First you will sit down a little distance from me, like that, in the grass. I shall look at you out of the corner of my eye, and you will say nothing. Words are the source of misunderstandings. But you will sit a little closer to me every day." The next day the prince came back. "It would have been better to come back at the same hour," said the fox. "If, for example, you came at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, then at 3 o'clock I shall begin to be happy. I shall feel happier and happier as the hour advances. At 4 o'clock I shall already be worrying and jumping about, and I shall show you how happy I am. But if you come at just any time, I shall never know what hour my heart is to be ready to greet you. One must observe the proper rites." So, in case management, the proper rites include such things as calling clients ahead of time so as not to show up unannounced, unless of course you expect the client to make sure that he or she is not there when you are arriving. You set up regular times for contact, not giving up or becoming defensive in response to repeated rejection, and being available to assist the client with things he or she is interested in doing and needs when he or she is ready to do so. Regardless of whether or not the client sought your help, recognize that the client had already embarked on his or her own journey before meeting you. Once an initial sense of trust and engagement with the case manager is in place, the staff may move to those components of their role that are more consistent with the role of a guide or a case manager. It's important to remember, however, the client was already on his or her own journey before the onset of the illness and before he or she came into contact with you as the case manager. As much as having a serious psychiatric disorder may have interrupted or interfered with the client's aspirations and plans for his or her own life, the journey that follows still has to be connected in meaningful ways to what came before. In other words, clients' lives did not begin with the onset of the disorder, just as their lives are not encompassed totally by the psychiatric treatment and rehabilitation. Clients are already on journeys of their own when we meet them. It is we who need to join their journey, get on their bus, so to speak, rather than try to persuade them to get on ours. Once we recognize that the client was already on a journey prior to the onset of his or her illness, and therefore prior to meeting us, the focus can then shift to the ways in which this journey was impacted by his or her illness. How was it that the psychiatric disorder changed the person's aspirations, hopes, and dreams? If the person appears to be sticking resolutely to the hopes and dreams he had prior to the onset of the disorder, and despite or in denial of the disorder and its disabling effects, then what steps need to be taken for him or her to get back on track or to take the next step or two along the track? Rather than the reduction of symptoms or the remediation of deficits, goals that we assume the client will share with us, it is the client's own goals for his or her life beyond or despite his or her disability that need to drive the treatment planning and rehabilitation efforts. Regardless of the number of tools or interventions that a case manager uses, it thus cannot be emphasized enough that at the heart of any effective intervention is the relationship between the case manager and the client. Like other caring people in the person's life, mental health providers must believe in the individual even when he or she cannot believe in him or herself, and the case manager serves as a gentle reminder of the client's potential. To promote recovery, providers must be able to envision a future for the client beyond the role of a mental patient or addict, based on the client's own desires and values, and must share this vision with the client through communication of positive expectations, optimism, and hope. Consistent with this principle, the establishment of trusting, supportive relationships through persistence and consistency is considered by some to be the most fundamental requirement of recovery-oriented care. In the presence of such relationships, the illness no longer remains the primary focus of a person's life, and the person is then able to move on to other interests and activities. With this kind of encouraging support, people will be more likely to expand their horizons and take risks that they haven't taken before. This ends the lesson on client engagement strategies. You are required to take the quiz and score at least 70% to successfully complete the lesson. Thank you.